Israel is in a state of war.
Families completely gunned down in their beds.
We have no idea where is she.
As our soldiers are fighting on the front lines, but the general perception is something that certainly needs to be fought as well.
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra Espadas de Hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24, únicamente en i24 News.
Welcome back to this breaking news edition. I'm Benita Levine, and we start this hour with the latest developments up north. Let's go straight to our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osaran. And Ariel, just moments ago, Daniel Hagari made a very clear message. He said terror organizations in Lebanon will pay the price if they target civilians. Over and above that message, developments out of Yemen. Bring us up to speed.
Right, Benita. So in this latest press statement by Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, IDF spokesperson, warning Hezbollah, saying that Israel will not allow this continued fire towards northern Israel, and that Israel will strike hard those who do so. But this comes as the IDF confirms that anti-tank guided missiles were launched at a home in the northern border community of Metula. There are no reports of injuries, but it is believed that damage has been caused to two buildings. Hezbollah claiming responsibility for this attack, saying that they targeted soldiers who were inside a home on that border community. Now, this is one of those communities that has been evacuated, as it's in the 4-kilometer distance from the northern border, to avoid civilian casualties as much as possible. But again, no reports of injuries following this attack. Lebanon reporting on the Lebanese side that Israel is carrying out artillery strikes across southern Lebanon in multiple towns, and that is the northern front. But you also asked regarding the Houthis. So the Houthis kind of doubling down on their threats towards any free passage of ships in the Red Sea, really taking this as far as they can, trying to leverage their geographic position. With one of the Houthi senior officials, Khazam al-Assad, tweeting in Hebrew, as he usually does, saying that now that the port of Eilat has been decommissioned, meaning that that ships are no longer approaching Israel's southern port. The same should happen to the ports of Ashdod and Haifa. Those are Israel's Mediterranean ports. So that obviously is an extension of the threat past the Red Sea. But as of now, the Houthis trying to amplify their threats and standing regarding their threat on free commercial passage in the Red Sea.
Threats on several fronts. Thank you so much for that update. We will be coming back to our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osaran, live there from northern Israel. And now we welcome to studio Danny Ayalon, the former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. and former Israeli deputy foreign minister and chairman of Silver Road Capital. Major General in the Reserves, Eitan Dangart, former military secretary to 3 Israeli defense ministers and former coordinator of government activities in the Palestinian territories in the IDF. And still with us, our correspondent, Robert Swift. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. And I'm going to start with you, Eitan, and what we just heard there from my colleague up north. Not only are there developments from southern Lebanon towards Metula, but also out of Yemen. Break down for us the threats that exist at this hour for Israel up north.
Okay, first of all, concerning the launching of anti-tank missile on Naus on Metula, it's something that it looks like moving ahead from what was contained during the last about, let's say, escalation, but in a low level. But it's not different than to shoot the guy who was agriculture farmer that came to his land a few days ago and was killed and shot by a civilian, by Hezbollah as well. So what does it mean? Basically, even what happened, I think and I claim that till now Hamas is respecting, if I may call it respecting, to continue to keep the low-level escalation and not to break it and to expand it, and not to the depth and not by changing the way. We have to wait. Secondly, the Israel defense reaction offensively is asymmetric towards what happened in each event that Israel is reacted. Quick, well, but much more with targets and damage to Hezbollah according to what is deployed among the border, like the intelligence structure of collecting information, etc. And I don't want to make it more due my words. And what is more bothering me now is that what's going with Yemen, with the Houthis, as you describe, with the fact that there are ships that they cancelled their arrival to Eilat or moving ahead to Suez to Ashdod. This is something that came to the Israel decision makers as I think quicker than they estimate, because Israel has to decide whether to go to it alone or try to force another kind of partnership, because it's a damage not only to Israel, it's a damage all over the world, because there are problems also with the Panama movement of ships, and I think the interest of 17% of the world activities during the Suez Canal, it's not a problem only to Israel, because most of the ships are stopping in Eilat or in Ashdod for a while and continuing their way. So it's under the Israeli decision-maker decision.
Stay with us. We've got more to discuss. Just to bring your attention to the fact that these are live images on your screen right now out of the Gaza Strip. You could see flares there just moments ago. Live images out of the Gaza Strip. Developments on several fronts. We will be unpacking them all. And you were talking about Iran and the Foreign Minister Hussein Amir Abdullahian sharing these sentiments that might surprise many in the region. Let's take a listen, and then I'd like your thoughts.
The only one that we have in common between us and the occupying regime of Israel is that neither of us believe in the two-state solution, because Israel does not believe in a two-state solution. As I said, that there needs to be one government, one ruling system in the Palestinian territories. There should be one that is determined by the people of Palestine. And Israel also believes that there should be only one government, one state, that is Israel, in all the Palestinian territories. So this is the only thing that we have in common. during the Trump time, even in the Biden time. We see that in practice, even the two-state solution has been ignored. This is what we are saying. The people of Palestine, the original ones, as I repeat, the Jews and the Christians and Muslims, they themselves should decide about their future.
Worth noting that those comments were translated. Nonetheless, Danny Ayalon, your thoughts on what we're hearing there out of Iran's foreign minister?
Well, it's very generous of him, but I don't think this is something that could be taken seriously at all. Nobody's talking about a one-state solution. Like, you cannot just put two different political entities and put them together. It didn't work in Yugoslavia. It didn't work in anywhere else in the world. It was just a real, more opportunities for bloodshed and things like that. What he's doing, actually, he's trying to drive a wedge. It's quite sophisticatedly between Israel and the United States. The United States is for a two-state solution, but the Israeli government at this time, including Mr. Netanyahu, do not want to speak about it. And the Americans are expecting some vision from Israel about the day after the war in Gaza. So the day after we'll have to take care of Lebanon, but sometimes we'll have to also deal with the Palestinian issue. It's a long, long way into the future to think of some kind of governance by the Palestinians. But certainly a one-state solution is not in the cards, and I don't think anyone will take it seriously.
And quite ironic, Rob, when you think of the way Iran is actually pulling the strings with Hezbollah right now, with Hamas, with the Houthis as well in Yemen, and yet making a call like that. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a bit of a wild card coming from them. Look, I think the chaos, to a certain extent, plays to their hand. For them to throw a bit more smoke into the scene to confuse things further, that's not a bad thing. They're also likely aware of the fact that there is not unanimous support for Israel or Israel's positions in Western countries, more so with publics rather than the governments, but there is quite a lot of unease towards Israeli policies. And if Iran thinks it can find a soft spot to apply pressure to an issue which might gain, if not gain it more support, certainly turn off support for Israel, this is to Iran's advantage and therefore to Hamas's advantage in this situation.
Certainly complicated dynamics indeed. Gentlemen, stay with us. Much more to discuss, but right now, as we've been discussing throughout this broadcast and since this war started, the plight of the hostages. Right now, 137 hostages remain in captivity in Gaza. It's more than 9 weeks since they were abducted by Hamas terrorists on the 7th of October. Qatar is said to be brokering another possible deal. But what steps are being taken by Russia to secure the release of these hostages? Well, Moscow's Deputy Foreign Minister, Mikhail Bogdanov, has reportedly spoken with Hamas representatives demanding the release of hostages held in Gaza. This coming a day after Benjamin Netanyahu and Vladimir Putin spoke on the phone for 50 minutes with the Israeli Prime Minister, calling out the Russian president for his alliance with Iran and his stance on Israel's war against Hamas. 3 hostages holding Israeli and Russian citizenship have been released by the terror group in gestures of gratitude from Hamas to the Russian leader. Now, a short while ago, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant making this call to the Red Cross. The organization has yet to gain access to any of the hostages being held in Gaza. Let's take a listen.
This is an opportunity to demand again from the Red Cross to live up to what is expected of it. We came to an agreement that there will be a visit of the Red Cross in the place where the hostages are. And I call upon all the organizations, especially the Red Cross, to bring a sign of life from our hostages. Women, elderly, soldiers, men and women, they should reach all of them, to visit them and to bring a sign of life. This is the humanitarian basic deed. And humanitarian is not just what's happening in Gaza. Humanitarian is also what is happening to our hostages. This is your duty. You should live up to it.
Eitan Dangot, we've discussed this many times since the war has started. It is just unfathomable. It's 9 weeks in, and there you have Israel's defense minister still calling out the Red Cross, saying, do your job.
Yes, and he's right, because this is a shame. This is an unbalanced situation of between looking towards Israel and looking towards the other world. There is Jewish and there is the other kind of people from all over the world. This claim or this demand has to be shown and said by our leaders every day, and to repeat on it, and by each community all over the world, and to convince more and more leaders. This should be our logo, because we have to put it very clear to the mind of Hamas and the others that our hostages is not a factor that you have to make business on it. It's a demand to return them back, and we will not rest and we will not stop in order to put it in the first time that we are able to on the desk. And it was under agreement that Hamas obliged to supply the names, obliged to allow the Red Cross to enter to Gaza. I don't hear between just here and there some statements by Red Cross or other international organizations who are talking about this kind of demand. I hear a lot about humanitarian issue. This is the first humanitarian right of a human being that was kidnapped from his bed, that his family was murdered by the butchers, and then come our reaction. And we are making, there is demand from Israel to release or to give humanitarian help to the Palestinians. I'm not saying no, but I say if you are giving, you have to get back these things. And the Minister of Defense absolutely right why he demanded. It's again, let's say, this is a passport of shame to the United Nations and its organizations.
Danny Ayalon, your thoughts on the Red Cross and its inability to gain access? Is it because of Hamas? Could Qatar have done something? Could Russia have done something? Who needs to make this happen and make it happen right now?
Well, I'm not sure that Russia could do anything. You know, they actually have been quite taken out of the picture. Hence, I think now Putin's desperate attempts to be back, since now the entire region is a wide open space only for the United States. You know, if the Russia or China thought that the U.S. is on decline and on its way out, it just this war actually put the United States back front and center on the expense of Russia and China. The only way for Russia to come back in is if they can give something valuable. The most valuable thing for Israel is the release of the hostages. So if Hamas can put the pressure on Qatar or Russia, if they can put direct pressure on Hamas, remains to be seen. But I don't think it's a surprise that Mikhail Bogdanov, the deputy foreign minister, has been talking to Hamas following the call of Putin and Netanyahu. I understand that the initiative for the call was Putin's, not Netanyahu's, which again goes back to the fact that Russia looks at it strategically of trying to be on par with the United States and play a role. The way for them, you throw a curveball to them maybe in that respect, but if they can do something vis-a-vis Hamas and the hostages, then maybe they deserve a place at the table. But otherwise, nothing new.
And in terms of the Red Cross, briefly, why is it that it wasn't strictly part of that initial deal to make sure that it happened?
Well, see, the Red Cross, we have to understand, it's a volunteering-based organization. However, they don't have military power to do anything, but they do have a moral authority, and this is what they have not used. They should have called day in and day out for at least getting the list, let alone supplying them with medicine and things that they need, and of course go and visit them. They have not done it. The first time that they really, or if they call and to do that, it's just too few, far between, and there is no real political pressure, not on Hamas and not on Qatar.
Maybe the Red Cross will succeed in another way if they succeed to release one hostage that is kept by the butcher world, I mean the Secretary General of the United Nations, if they pay a visit to him and release him from being under the control of these nations.
Well, let's see why there isn't an outcry from A, the UN, B, the Red Cross, other organizations, human rights organizations, so to speak, as well. And when you hear a story like the one you're about to hear, it really does raise so many questions. Israeli mother Sharon Aloni Cuneo survived 52 days as a hostage in Gaza before she and her twin daughters were released as part of a hostage deal. But she fears for the life of her husband, who is still being held by the terror group. In her first interview since her release, the 34-year-old mother from Kibbutz near Oz told Reuters about her ordeal, the fact that they split up her twin daughters. I'm going to say that again. They split up her twin daughters, keeping them apart from her for 10 days, and how they were separated from her husband David before they were released from Hamas captivity. Let's take a listen to some of that interview.
Sometimes when there was a power cut, they let us open the door and they drew the curtain, and then we had to whisper. How do you retain a little girl whispering for 12 hours? Every moment you have to be angry at her, tell her, quiet, quiet, don't. We had to tell the children that it's dangerous outside and here we're safe. But with this safety comes rules. We need to be quiet. We must not be hurt because the bad guys will come. You need to make up lots of stories and behave in a way that you would never behave at home to make them keep quiet in this situation. We were together almost until the end in unbearable conditions. You need to knock on a door to leave to the toilet to ask for basic things. My daughters were already toilet trained, and I had to revert to using nappies because you knock on the door and you don't know when they'll open it. They had to pee in the sink and poo in a trash bin. You don't know if there will be food or not. You don't know. We all have so many triggers. Every little noise, every door slam, every airplane flying. The girls get charged and cling on to me. Tantrums, because they had to be so quiet for 52 days, closed up in a single room. This is not a normative situation for a 3-year-old. It means not to stay in a crowded, loud place because it reminds them of it. It means not knocking on doors next to me, not to sleep with the door shut. Life has changed. This is not life. I think none of the returnees came back to being themselves as they were before October 7 on so many levels. The inability to sleep, the nightmares, the triggers. Speaking quietly is just one of the habits that stuck with us. 3 days before we were released, they separated David from us. They took him into a different hiding place, and since then, I don't know what is happening to him. The girls are torn. I'm torn. He's been my partner for 10 years. He's my other half and the love of my life. He's the father of my girls who are asking every day, "Where's Daddy? Where's Daddy?" I need to explain to them that he is still there. Every minute we're waiting is like a Russian roulette. Will they live through the day or not? And the conditions are difficult. Conditions that no one needs to live in, especially not children or adults without medicine. We saw that many have already lost their lives in captivity. So each moment is critical, and we need to do everything to put the aim of releasing all hostages prior to anything else.
Unimaginable. Israeli mother Sharon Aloni Cuneo. And Danny Ayalon, this is a level of cruelty that is difficult to comprehend. And so, as we were saying ahead of time, if the Red Cross could get answers for her and tell her if her husband is alive, never mind the condition that he is. And when you hear these reports, a woman with one twin, the other twin separated from her, the conditions that captivity brought for them, 52 days. It is unimaginable. Why is the world not seeing and hearing this and responding, Danny Ayalon?
Well, that's a good question, because this is really the job of organizations, human rights organizations. You know, there is the Human Rights Commission in Geneva. There is the child, you know, UNICEF, and of course so many other UN organizations. They are mum because of, you know, this international community is totally cynical, it's skewed, it's biased, and it is controlled by what we call the Arab majority. And with the Arab majority, they control whatever they want, and we have no chance actually to get justice and to get the basic human rights for our people. And this is something which I think will put a black mark on the entire international community for a long time to come.
Robert, there are more and more examples of what we just heard now, details emerging about the conditions in captivity. It really is unimaginable, and it's more than 9 weeks now. It's getting colder. From what we understand, food was scarce for many of them. Some were in tunnels, some were above ground, but were moved from home to home. Talk to us about what is known right now, the kind of information that is being gleaned that might help in terms of locating other hostages right now.
So there has been information coming out from some of the hostages with regards to the conditions that they've been in. The picture given is that as the war has lengthened, the conditions have deteriorated. This is obviously alarming because the war doesn't look like it's about to end anytime soon, and there's still 137 people still to bring back. With regards to specific information about locations, for now we haven't heard too much of that. I'm sure there are many Israelis that will hope that that information is there, but the Israeli military is keeping it to themselves, and that this is the sort of material they're using for special forces raids. We have seen some hints that these sorts of operations are taking place. And, you know, many Israelis will be hoping that if another ceasefire and another hostage deal can't take place, that then at least the Israeli military will be able to go in using force to access the hostages that remain there.
And Eitan, your thoughts on exactly that? The fighting continues right now. We saw those live images inside the Gaza Strip just moments ago, but potentially it's not clear where some of the hostages are being held at this juncture. How does that impact the way the fighting unfolds in the coming hours, days and weeks?
First of all, we have to make it clear that the release of the hostages is the urgent, the important, and the duty of our country, and by the IDF, which serving until now it served at the first shift of the release, the pressure on Hamas. When Hamas stopped it and cut all its obligation towards the first agreement, and came to conclusion that we don't have any kind, again, there is a wall, not a door and not a window to continue. The continue of the maneuvering of the IDF also is serving to create a pressure on Hamas. By the way, in my opinion, due to my experience, I think Danny will agree with me, there are still contact between Israel and other countries like Qatar and Egypt. The moment that will be identified opportunity and chances to release, it will be stopped, and I'm sure it will be stopped to give this chance. Every minute is a great delay for us.
No doubt about that. Gentlemen, stay with us. Much more to unpack right now. We're taking a very quick break. When we get back, our rolling coverage continues on this breaking news edition. Back in 2 minutes. Stay tuned. Israel is in a state of war.
Families completely gunned down in their beds.
We have no idea where is she. As our soldiers are fighting on the front lines, but the general perception is something that certainly needs to be fought as well.
Welcome back to this breaking news edition. I'm Benita Levine. It's not often in Israel that the Prime Minister and the military want one thing and the security cabinet decides another. But that's what happened on Sunday night when Israel's security cabinet rejected a push to let Palestinian workers from the West Bank return to work inside Israel itself. Our senior correspondent Owen Alterman explains in this report.
Once upon a time, in an October 6th world, this was the Erez Crossing, the border between Israel and the Gaza Strip, with Palestinian traders and workers lining up to cross into Israel to do business or earn a living. But this is an October 7th world, and in that world, the Israeli Security Cabinet Sunday night rejected a move to return even West Bank Palestinian workers to building sites and farms inside Israel. Returning Gazan workers is a non-starter.
The entry of workers from Judea and Samaria is exactly the continuation of the same concept that we warn against. We know what it is when they come full of hate and motivated. I'm not saying that all of them are, but it's enough that 10% of them are like that.
For decades, West Bank Palestinians have been a key part of the Israeli workforce, filling jobs that Israelis don't want to do, an imported workforce, as in many developed countries. The establishment saw this as a win-win. The Israeli economy got workers it needs. West Bank Palestinians earned money to support their families. Then came October 7th, and reports that workers from inside the Gaza Strip helped the perpetrators navigate the kibbutzim on which those workers had worked, and slaughter Israelis, whom those workers had known. Some experts still urge caution.
During the second Intifada, I was in charge of the Ramallah area, and I said that we need to let those people that are not involved with the terrorism to come and work in Israel. Eventually, the government decided not to let them work, and I think that many people were pushed into terrorism.
The Security Cabinet rejected the advice of the National Security Council and of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu himself, making this a striking vote of no confidence. The politicians and likely the public do not trust those security services to keep out the bad guys, just like they didn't on October 7th.
A complicated situation indeed. Eitan Dangot, your thoughts?
I think it's an issue not between economical to security. It's an issue between security and political. What happened there? From the facts, after 2 months that the crossing were closed, and it was a right to close them when happened the 7th of October. I think that now we are able enough to look what happened in the West Bank and to estimate the situation. In that case, I think, as a Kogat, former Kogat, that it's the time to open the gate for categories of workers that should be go outside, try to work to make some pilots and to see what is going above it, to take calculating risk and to reduce the risk on the other end. Because in my opinion, the fact that thousands of people are in the street and didn't take the choice to be involved in violence and in terrorism, it's the time also to give them the opportunity to return back, to earn money and to build their life economy under much more, let's say, control by the Israelis. And also, we don't have to forget, in West Bank there is the Palestinian authorities. We cannot hold the stick from two sides. We have to check opportunities in order to give them the tools, financial opportunity to move ahead from the terrorism, the majority of the people in the West Bank, and to deal as we are doing now every night, every hour in the West Bank by fighting with the terrorism, and in my opinion, with great success.
Gentlemen, stay with us. We're going to discuss this in far greater detail, but right now, let's turn to the latest on the furor around the rise of anti-Semitism on U.S. college campuses since the 7th of October. Several hundred faculty members at Harvard University have signed a petition asking school administrators not to bend to political pressure to fire the school's president over her congressional testimony. A petition was signed by at least 570 professors and was delivered to the Harvard Corporation, which has the power to fire University President Claudine Gay. The pressure coming after the president of the University of Pennsylvania, Liz McGill, resigned on Saturday. The presidents of Harvard, UPenn, and MIT declined to give a definitive yes or no answer when asked whether calling for the genocide of Jews would violate their school's codes of conduct regarding bullying and harassment, saying they had to balance it against free speech protections and it was context dependent. So for more insight, we welcome Asaf Romarovsky, Executive Director at Scholars for Peace in the Middle East, joining us from Philadelphia. Thank you so much for your time. So should she stay or should she go? This petition is asking the Harvard Corporation not to bend to political pressure here, including pressure to remove President Claudine Gay. Your thoughts?
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I think that the precedent we saw with Liz McGill putting pressure on her to finally have Penn have her leave, that, Harvard and MIT should follow suit. That being said, there is a structural problem that we've seen in general in the academy at large, and what was exposed during these hearings is a rot in the academy at large. You've seen here the use of what is known in the United States as diversity, equity, and inclusion and critical race theory to basically defend racism in the guise of being racist at the same time. So Jews do not fall under that categorization, which is what you saw, this kind of semantic use of language or stretching what is of the First Amendment to try to defend their actions by trying to say they're defending free speech while at the same time being racist toward Jews. And I think that the academy at large needs to look very carefully at what they're putting out there, which there's been a structural racism where Jews are not seen as minorities and racism and anti-Semitism is not seen as racism. And that's the reality that we've seen play out here, even though when you put actual facts on the ground, especially post-October 7th, where you're actually seeing for calls of genocide, for killings of Jews, no distinguishing between left, right, or center, that they are still unable to stand behind what is really, truly racist activity under the guise of what they're trying to play out, the use of free speech. So I think that, if you're asking me, I think that they actually have to look very carefully at their funding, at their leadership, and to actually put, and actually stand behind what these universities are supposed to be, of a liberal Western university, which actually takes these issues very carefully when it comes to discrimination against Jews.
These double standards are certainly quite staggering, and it's 2023. So the University of Pennsylvania confirming that Julie Platt, the chair of the Jewish Federations of North America, will serve as the interim chair of the board. How does she tackle rampant anti-Semitism on every level on campus, not just with students, but also administrators? Talk us through the challenges here.
Well, it's more than the administration. I mean, the administration, and I would also argue the faculty, which we deal with all day long. The faculty are also a structural problem, and I would argue that, this is the argument that we've made in our organization. Faculty are forever, students come and go. But there's been a structural problematic within the faculty who, over the course, I would say, of several decades now, there's been a growth of what I would call scholar activism in replacement of scholarship. And so all of these use of protest and sending students to pro-Palestinian rallies, going and participating, calling for the genocide and killing of Jews, have all been sponsored specifically within Middle East Studies departments and within the humanities at large. So when you're talking about an individual like Platt, who also serves as the chair of the JFNA, Jewish Federations of North America, I think that there has to be a real careful look at the composition of what the board is and the kind of what they're willing to tolerate, what they're not willing to tolerate. She also made it very clear in her statement that she's also going to be the interim individual until they find somebody else. But the case study of McGill, while McGill has been resigned, she's still a tenured faculty at the law school. So again, even within the structural understanding of the University of Pennsylvania, she's still going to be there teaching. And I guarantee you that whatever, they believe and say out publicly, they're also going to be teaching in their classrooms. And so that's also part of the problem itself. There has to be a larger, real concrete inside look at the structure of the university, who's teaching these topics, what is being taught in these classrooms, balance in the classroom, which is really a critical aspect when these issues, and scholarship, and that needs to be looked at very carefully, not polemics, which is what you're seeing as a result of where professors and administrators have used and abused their roles. The portfolio of anti-Semitism on most university campuses, which have invested millions of dollars in diversity, equity, and inclusion, the portfolio of anti-Semitism falls in their responsibility. They wouldn't know anti-Semitism if they saw it.
And to think these are the elite campuses in the United States. Many challenges, a long road ahead. For now, thank you so much for your insights. Safra Mirovsky, live from Philadelphia. Thank you for being on I-24 News. Danny Ayalon, you know the U.S. all too well. Your take on what we just heard?
Well, I think it's much bigger than the campuses. First of all, the leaderships of these campuses, especially those Ivy League and those that we saw testifying, they proved themselves to be unqualified, unfit to be leading any kind of institution, least of which is an academic institution. But I think that it should be a matter of punishment and disciplinary acts. Any call for murders of Jews or genocide of Jews should be outlawed by the governments of states, by the federal government, and there should be enforcement of legislation so that you cannot just raise signs about killing Jews. Anyone who raises a sign like that should be arrested, put behind bars, get slap a big fine. This is the only way to stop it. There should be no tolerance to such anti-Semitic slur.
And when you hear these presidents of these Ivy League institutions talking about issues being context dependent, how insulting is that right now?
It is. It's pathetic. I mean, we saw them, how they are really sticking to a text that was really given to them probably by some legal advisor. And here you think an academic mind, you should be inquisitive, should be free. They were not even deviating even one letter from what was given to them. They were just or what was dictated to them, they were just parroting. This is not leadership, this is not academic excellence. I think all of them should be fired or follow suit of Ms. McGill.
Certainly something we will be watching to see exactly how it all unfold. Staggering in 2023. Robert Swift, you've been covering this region for a very long time. We've been seeing these anti-Israel protests in several centers since the 7th of October. Talk to us about the temperature on the ground in some of the nations that would surprise you the most, including the United States and London.
The United States is probably actually the one that surprised me the most. The level that this has been an issue here. I think in general there's the assumption or the understanding that generally the public in the United States is more sympathetic towards Israel than, say, many European states. However, this issue, while it has been seen in other capitals, such as London, there has been large pro-Palestinian protests. There's been a lot of discussion between the government, the London police and protesters. Discussion's maybe not the right word, but there has been a lot of heat in that debate there too. But it's certainly in the United States where the level of discourse on the campuses has got to such a fever pitch.
Robert Swift, Danny Ayalon, Eitan Dangot, thank you all so much for being here in studio. No doubt much to unpack on this front in the coming weeks and months. Thank you very much for being here at I24 News. Now, the Nova Music Festival was just one of the locations targeted by Hamas terrorists on the 7th of October. 58 police officers died protecting partygoers in the area on that day. Sagi was one of the police officers who survived after facing 14 terrorists. Our Moore Ellen has more in this report.
It's Sagi's first time back in the fighting zone of the Nova Festival since October 7. Barbara, his girlfriend, is with him. He brought her for moral support, but returning still made him uneasy.
It's hard, bringing a lot of memories, a lot of people that you saw at that day that are not with us today. A lot of memories. I arrived here at 6 o'clock in the morning for a morning shift here in the party. A lot of young people, happy, dancing, good vibes. The stage was here in the middle. All the people, you can see the picture of the fortunately murdered was here. In the middle was the dancing area. The war room and the firefighter room and all this thing was in the back of the stage. And when I arrived, we just preparing ourselves to the shift, to secure the area, to make sure everything is okay, everybody's okay. And in about 6:30, kinda, we saw a lot of rockets coming from Gaza into Israel. Immediately, the police commander that was in the party told us, all the officers, to go inside the party and stop the music and evacuate everybody out.
At first, the police present asked the party-goers to lie on the ground. Minutes later, they decided to evacuate them completely. As people were leaving the area, the situation was revealed to be graver than imaginable.
Someone from the party ran at me with his phone in his hand, and he said to me, my brother is on the line, okay, and someone shot at him on the road, on the main road. Immediately I took his phone and I ran into the police war room, and I tell the police officer that was there, take the phone, speak with him.
Sagi, together with two other policemen, drove to the location of the shooting. One of them was Eliona Ostafenko. On the main road, only 220 yards from the party area, they encountered first signs of the tragedy that would unfold that day.
We get here, And over there, near the sign, we saw a man just do like this with his hand, and we drove to him, and he says someone shoot at him, and we look at his car, and we see in the back door a bullet, just a hole of a bullet. He wasn't injured.
The civilian told Sagi he saw trucks with people holding weapons.
In this moment, I pulled my gun and I take him and went like off the back of the road over there, and we lay on the ground.
Meanwhile, Eliona and another policeman went back to the party area to report and call for reinforcements.
We start to understood what's happening, but we thought it's only a few ones that came here and they are still here around somewhere.
The three were now driving again, trying to catch up with the terrorists. Finally, they saw a car on the side of the road.
In this place, we saw a white van, and we saw a man lying on the floor near the van, and he just put his hand on his belly and he screamed. So me and Ilona get off the police car and went to him and started to talk to him. And when I pulled up his shirt, I saw a big hole in his belly because of a bullet. And I said to Ilona, start make a pressure. And I get into the van from the other side. I open the door and I see a guy laying on his back with his eyes open. And I check if he had the pulse or something like this, and he didn't have anything. He was murdered.
While Sagi and Ilona tended to the wounded, the third policeman drove back to fetch the medical teams.
So we are here, only me and Ilona, with no communication, no car, no anything. We stay with the injured people. And then we saw two Jeeps that come at us, and they park like 100, 150 meters from us. And from each Jeep, get off something like 6 or 7 terrorists each. So it's like 12 or 14 terrorists. And they're just starting to shoot at us.
The two were standing in an open field. While outnumbered, the terrorists were also better armed with rifles and RPGs. Eliona and Sagi had their personal weapons and 2 magazines with 15 bullets each. Sagi dragged the wounded civilian to the other side of the van. An exchange of fire began as they tried to shoot back, but they realized they didn't stand a chance.
I tell Ilona we have to run back, but there is nowhere to run back here. And then I see this water pipe.
Under fire, they both ran as fast as they could.
They shoot at us. The bullets are like everywhere.
And then, the second before they reached the water pipe, Eliona was hit.
Exactly in this point, like 1 or 2 meters from the pipe, Ilona said to me, "I'm hit," and she hold her breath, and she is feeling over here. And I get here behind this pipe, and I lie right here, and my head is behind this pipe, and I'm right here, and with my pistol, I shoot at them, and they shoot at me like tons of bullets.
The terrorists went back to the van to make sure the 2 wounded civilians were dead.
You are complete yourself with the thought that you're gonna die. That's the only thing you think of. The only thing you think of. That's it.
1 against 14 terrorists. What chance did Sagi have?
One of them go to their Jeep, and he bring an RPG, and he go over his knees, and he shoot the RPG on me, and the RPG is exploding like 10, 15 meters behind me.
The 14 terrorists came into Sagi's direction. He played dead and didn't shoot back.
And then I see 2 army chopper just getting from this way to this way above this field. And the terrorists see the chopper, The terrorists see the chopper, and they take 3 RPG and they shoot on the chopper.
Luckily, they missed, but now the terrorists, for some inexplicable reason, go back on their jeeps and flee.
In this moment, I check Ilona that are laying here, and unfortunately, she murdered.
Eliona Ostafenko was killed at the age of 25. In total, 58 police officers died protecting the partygoers of the Nova Festival on October 7, making it the biggest tragedy in the history of Israeli police.
I see car going just to the terrorist direction, and I ran to the road and just stop.
Sagi could still spot the terrorists on the side of the road, waiting for more cars to cross. He updated the soldier inside the car. The two did a U-turn in the intersection nearby. They saw a group of 100 Nova Festival survivors. He took charge and put them all in a safe room. The soldier, a civilian with a gun, and Sagi guarded the entrance of the safe room for hours until the IDF was able to extract them to a safe location. Over 2 months have passed, and these beautiful fields that on October 7 became the landscape of an unimaginable horror movie are now again peaceful, thanks to the men and women who put their lives on the line to save others.
Another unsung hero. And now, changing gears as we turn to the football pitch for a special match between children evacuated from the towns of Sderot in the south and Kiryat Shmona in the north, up against a team of Israeli artists. Our Fabio Shapiro and Emma Oliver have the story.
Amid Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights, a spark of happiness for the displaced Israeli communities from the south and the north, the central town of Herzliya became the stage of a special game for children of Sderot and Kiryat Shmona, both facing the effects of Israel's war with Hamas, and the daily provocations from the Lebanese Hezbollah group. The kids' adversaries? The Israel Football Artists team, formed by Israeli singers, actors, and influencers, including Guy Mazig, Tomer Cohen, Bar Tzabari, and Oshri Cohen.
We have the privilege to bring smiles into their faces, beautiful young kids that, get out of their homes and their life in a way is now stuck. And if we can do that to them, and if we can help in any way, we are more than happy to do that. I hug them, I love them, and I'm happy for what we did here today.
Across the country, the war brought up the best people can offer to help the affected communities. Israelis are making a big effort to provide not only food and clothes, but entertainment to the thousands of displaced.
The biggest thing that I feel in this war is that the people of Israel come together in so many ways. And for me, when they asked me to come here and play, I didn't even think twice. I was just, yeah, of course, let's do it. In my neighborhood, I live in Tel Aviv, in the center of Tel Aviv, and I see so many people from the north and from the south, and I meet them and I talk to them, and I try to help as much as I can. And from here, I want to hug them and tell them that hopefully it will be all right, and we are here for them.
Though it was only a friendly match, the children offered a challenge to the artists. The game ended up tied at 10-10, leaving both the kids and the artists excited for a rematch, hopefully in better times.
In better times, indeed. And that is a wrap for this edition of our breaking news coverage. I'm Benita Levine. Our rolling coverage continues shortly. Ariel Levin-Waldman is up next. Stay tuned. Thank you for watching.
Made for Me, a unique concept in Israel. Custom-made men's fashion to your measurements. Made for Me, designer of all your events. Schedule your appointment at www.madeforme.co.il. Made for Me, official dresser of I-24 News.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Israel is at war. Make an investment in Israel bonds. It is the most powerful and direct way to stand with Israel. Visit israelbonds.com and invest now.
Israel is in a state of war.
Families completely gunned down in their beds.
We have no idea where is she. As our soldiers are fighting on the front line, but the general perception is something that certainly needs to be fought as well.
אין מילי נחמה אל מילות השכול ברגעים קשים אלו. צה"ל נלחם אל מול האויב.
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra, espadas de hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24, únicamente en i24 News.
Good night and welcome to I-24 News' ongoing coverage of Israel at war. I'm Ariel Levin-Waldman. The war in the south grinds on with intensive fighting across Khan Yunis, Hamas's key stronghold city in the south. The IDF says they are fighting ambushes from firing positions built within civilian infrastructure, such as schools and health clinics. And the Air Force says they have struck dozens of Hamas fighters in precision strikes during the fighting. One intense battle cost the lives of 5 soldiers to an IED detonated inside a school, bringing today's losses to 7, one of the harshest days of the war for the IDF. So far, 104 IDF soldiers have fallen in battle against the enemy in Gaza since the ground operations began. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has rejected American pressure for a swift conclusion to the war, saying the war will end only once the war's goals are accomplished: the destruction of the Hamas terror group's military and political power, and the liberation of 137 hostages abducted during Hamas's October 7th massacre and crimes against humanity. Gallant said that interrogations of surrendering terrorists have yielded valuable information, and that Hamas's Jabalia and Sejaya battalions, the last major terror forces in the north of Gaza, are on the cusp of total destruction. The IDF announced that the military's chief of staff and the head of the Shin Bet Internal Security Services met inside Khan Yunis to assess the situation. But the enemy is not broken yet. Hamas continues to bombard Israel with their rocket arsenal. An early afternoon barrage into Israel's center wounded 1 man in the city of Holon. But the war in the north is intensifying. The IDF hitting Hezbollah mortar teams amidst heavy bombardments, as well as attacks from the terror group's heavy Burkan warhead launches. For more on this, we are now joined by our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Oseran. Ariel, it's good to have you with us. Walk us through what the latest developments are on the northern front.
Right, Ariel. So about a couple hours ago, multiple anti-tank guided missiles fired by Hezbollah targeting a house in the northern border community of Metula. No reports of injuries there. Hezbollah claiming to target a group of soldiers who were in that house, but the IDF confirming that there were no injuries in that attack. Two buildings were damaged in that attack. Now, the IDF said that it had responded with artillery fire towards the source of that missile attack. And on the Lebanese side, reports from the past few minutes of a house struck in the South Lebanese border community of El Khiam, that is not too far away from where Metula is located on the border. So that corroborates the Israeli response. And obviously this comes amid also reports of potential negotiations regarding a diplomatic avenue to prevent this war in the north from escalating, as well as claims and threats by IDF spokesperson this evening in his daily press conference saying that this firing from Lebanon must stop and Israel will act to make it so.
Well, thank you very much, Ariel, for that update from the Northern Front. We'll be back with you a little later in the show for more. And we are joined now in studio by Dr. Fadi Ismail, former senior staffer to the U.S. Congress, as well as a research fellow with the International Institute for Counterterrorism. Fadi, very good to have you with us.
Thank you.
We are talking about what comes after Hamas is defeated. And the entirety of the Israeli defense establishment is looking north and saying Hezbollah is going to the next front. There's going to be a war after the war. Is there any world in your mind where that is not the case, where Hezbollah is forced through other means to retreat beyond the Litani River?
This is a good question. Can I imagine a world? The answer is yes, of course. In the end, these are organizations that respond to their leadership, and their leadership responds to all kinds of considerations. And if they decide that the sum total of the advantages for them to basically go, it's basically UN decision, UN resolution 1701. This is what they're supposed to do. This is the United Nations position, and they are basically violating it by being beyond the Litani River. So if they decide that the sum total of their considerations, it's favorable for them to go there, then in that imaginary, hypothetical universe, they might. However, they already said they won't do it, because the people that they have south of the Litani are residents of the villages in southern Lebanon, and we know those villages. So they say, what do you expect us to do? To tell our own people to leave their homes? That's how they manage to run circles around the United Nations decision. They say, hey, yeah, he is one of ours. Yes, he is south of the Litani, but that's where he lives. So actually, if you think about this, it's pretty smart. So what are we going to? So what will you do then with this argument? What can you do? We can demand that there will be no heavy equipment from Hezbollah south of Litani River, which again doesn't mean much, because the heaviest equipment is the missiles, and they're all in the area of the Kalamun Mountains, which are way further north on the border between Syria and Lebanon. That doesn't impact them that much, but yeah, they cannot send APCs there, and they have to pull. If this is what we can do, then we can demand that we'll pull their special forces and so on from the borders. I mean, if they're not in their own homes, I mean, they're just forces that they have deployed, and we can demand that they leave. This is more or less what we can do there. Would that be enough for the Israeli public? I don't know. And people want to go back to the towns, the border towns. And if we are left with this situation where Israelis are refusing to go back to the border towns, and basically Hezbollah has created a strip inside Israel that has no Israelis in it, almost without doing anything, this is something. I mean, we will have to sit down and study how we got here, because this will be an amazing
territorial loss. That and we're going to continue this line of discussion in a brief moment. But first, I do want to bring our southern correspondent in, because you mentioned it yourself. We saw a similar situation in the south. Well, our correspondent Pia Steckelbach is standing by in southern Israel on the Gaza border in that general area. Pia, can you walk us through the latest developments we have seen in the war in Gaza today?
Fighting is currently ongoing in different areas of the Gaza Strip. In the south, the fighting, of course, is focusing on Khan Yunis, the Gaza Strip's second largest city, the largest city in the southern part there. This is where the ground operation is currently advancing. Only a couple of hours ago, the Israeli military published that today the IDF Chief of Staff, Herzi Halevi, met there with the chief of the Shin Bet, the Israeli Internal Security Agency, Ronen Bar. They met in Khan Yunis and discussed the advance of the ground operation there. They're saying that the continuous operation, the continuous presence of the IDF troops on the ground and the fighting would pressure the Hamas personnel that is still there on the ground to surrender eventually. The south is where the Israeli security establishment estimates that senior Hamas leaders, including possibly Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas leader in Gaza, to hide out in those tunnels. But this is also where they estimate those more than 130 hostages to be located. So the challenge of this operation in the south is really to localize Hamas infrastructure, to extract the hostages, and to, in the end, dismantle this infrastructure. But we're speaking about urban warfare. We're speaking about a very densely populated area. There are still lots of civilians in that area. And only this morning, the IDF published the message that yesterday 6 soldiers were killed exactly in that wider area of Khan Yunis when they were met with explosives that were embedded in the area of a school there. Another really example of how difficult the operations there are. But the Israeli army is confident to continue as it is pushing further down to the south. We also do know that fighting is continuing in the central part of the Gaza Strip, in the Gaza City neighborhood of Shujaiya, and of course in the north. The IDF is saying that it has at least operational control in the north, but now the goal is to dismantle and eliminate the remaining infrastructure there. What we've been witnessing all throughout the evening is the Israeli artillery outgoing there, and also the operations of the engineering corps operating in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, dismantling the tunnel shafts, dismantling weapon depots. Just about half an hour ago, we could hear a major boom that was heard in several communities here around the border, and this is what we estimate one of those bombs possibly that is aimed at destroying those tunnels there. This is incredibly loud, but this is also these are very, very complicated operations that do demand a lot of manpower there on the ground and a lot of expertise that you can gain once you, as I said, have operational control in an area.
Well, thank you very much, Pia, for that report from the front. And for our audience, though, we are going to look a little further at urban warfare in Gaza. Dangerous and very difficult task for the soldiers, but the IDF is seeing results. Entire Hamas battalions either killed or caught, and the IDF is hoping to see similar results further south as the ground operation continues. Our senior defense correspondent, Jonathan Regev, brings us the following.
House to house, alleyway to alleyway. This is what urban warfare in the dense Gaza neighborhoods looks like. While the IDF forces are massive but exposed, the small Hamas squads, much more familiar with the narrow streets, appear from the tunnels for just a few seconds. They hope to score with an explosive device or an anti-tank missile. The IDF's aim is to hit them from the ground or from the air before they do it. Hundreds of terrorists have been killed just in the past few days. Hundreds more understand this will be their fate if they continue fighting and choose instead to surrender. Among them, some top officials.
A group of crazy people led by Yahya Sinwar destroyed everything. They destroyed the Gaza Strip and took it 200 years backwards.
Hamas itself may be trying to portray images of resilience in Gaza, but the former minister is telling a different story.
Hamas, the Qassam brigades, and especially Yahya Sinwar, are responsible for the situation. This is my opinion, but also the opinion of the people. They are saying that Sinwar and his people destroyed us, and we have to get rid of them.
The images of surrender are coming from the north of the Strip. The hope is to see them soon in the south. That is why the IDF is pushing forward towards Khan Yunis. In order to keep this going, supplies are constantly provided to the forces. For those deep inside, they come from the air.
The 98th Division is operating in Khan Yunis. We keep providing them in every way possible.
Together with the Air Force and the technological and logistical unit, we provide them with all types of supplies from the air. Our division is able to do that, even when there is no way to reach our commando fighters by land.
The constant logistical assistance, along with the massive firepower, should eventually lead to victory in Khan Yunis as well.
And we return to the studio with Dr. Fadi Ismail, who is still with us. I want to discuss more about what we're seeing in Gaza right now. The IDF saying that in the north of Gaza, the Jabaliya and Shajaiya brigades are almost broken. With them out of the way, does that mean the war in the north of Gaza will be effectively over?
No. I mean, Hamas has about, give or take, 18 such battalions, if I'm not mistaken, something along those lines. Also, almost broken doesn't mean they don't exist anymore, because if you have a few hundred fighters, so if you have 30 or 40 left, it can cause a lot of damage. We're speaking about, this is not big armies fighting each other. We're talking about very small, you saw that, very small, narrow spaces. Even a single fighter can cause a lot of damage to a superior force. That's obvious. It depends where they are and how they're positioned, what kind of ammunition they have. We have seen that. We've seen it in Lebanon, for example, in 2006, where sometimes single fighters managed to mess with the entire companies because of the place where they were, the way they were hidden, and the kind of weaponry they had. So I wouldn't want to go into that mindset. This is a dangerous thing to think. This is exactly how you fail. You start thinking it's over, and that's when you're most vulnerable. So somebody would ask me, do you mean you have to get to the very last one of them? In a sense, yes. Not necessarily kill the last one of them, but neutralize, like getting out. They can surrender and they're out of the fight. That's part of it. But the thing is, I'm worried that with the successes, so far it doesn't look like it's happening, but people might feel too confident. And that's when mistakes happen. People might not pay attention to roadside bombs, may not pay attention to tripwires, may not pay attention to certain windows, not covering the back. I mean, it can happen. We know because in the end, these are infantry soldiers. They become tired, they become, they lack focus, become hungry, they become, it's just so much sensory overload. So I don't like, this is maybe it's not a pessimist, it's the experienced part in me. I used to be one of those guys. I know how easy it is to become exhausted. So no, we are far from done. We need full focus now, exactly the way we had 2 months ago. The one time when I can tell you we're done is when really almost every single one of them will stand up and say it's done. Either they're lying, injured or dead, or they surrender. This is the only moment. But when you still have 10, 12 battalions active and hidden underground, no, we're far from there. This is why the Israeli government cannot promise President Biden that by the end of 2023 it will stop. It's just not doable. How can you promise something like that? You have to understand, we started with about 30 to 40,000 fighters. Hamas, most of them are on the ground still. And they are taking most of the food that comes into Gaza. They take most of the water. They steal most of the fuel. So they are taking care of themselves. So it means that every time we send more stuff in, the chances that they are buying for themselves a few more weeks. So this is something we have to think about. I get very nervous when people talk about, are we done? No, we're not. Stay focused and now pay attention. Again, out of experience, and I've seen how a sense of confidence can bring you down.
What you're describing is in many ways identical to what coalition forces faced in Iraq after the destruction of Saddam Hussein's army. The insurgency phase of the war was where American soldiers took most of their casualties. Ultimately, does Israel have a strategy for fighting against the insurgency after the fight against, the war itself?
Israel has no strategy. It was a surprise attack. Shouldn't have been, but that's a whole different discussion, and we'll have this discussion at length when the time comes. How come it was a surprise when it shouldn't have been? But effectively, it was a surprise attack. So everything we see now is still a reaction. Yes, Israel has taken the initiative, militarily speaking. Yes, all this is true, but still, the thought is still being organized right now. Let's say that we managed somehow to break the command structure. Iraq was a different situation because in Iraq, we actually disbanded the army. Actively disbanded the army, and the army responded, and that was an army. Here you have basically a paramilitary force more similar to a well-organized militia. It's not really an army, so you can't really disband it. So there will become a few gangs, like Mad Max-style gangs running around the place and shooting anything. That will be a mess. That will be a real mess. It will be like just going one by one, fighting by one, finding a way to, and I'm not sure there is an easy way to make it worth their while to stop fighting. From what we're seeing, for many of them, they already stopped fighting because in the end, they also have to calculate the advantages versus the disadvantages of doing this. Not everybody who joined Hamas as a soldier did it really because of very much patriotism. Sometimes it's just a paycheck. Remember, it's Gaza. There are no jobs there. Most of the youngsters there have they have no jobs, even if they have degrees. So you can imagine that thousands of them join the service just to have some kind of paycheck. So once all of this dries up, I would imagine that many of them will just stop showing up to work. There will be some hardcore types that probably will keep on fighting for a while. Another difference from Iraq. In Iraq, there was an external force that funded the insurgency. The insurgency was not simply a spontaneous uprising of the people. It was funded. It was organized by outside forces, number one, Iran, but others as well, who wanted to see the U.S. failing. There even, at the time, we even suspected Moscow for some of them. So it's different. I'm not sure that here they will have the same exact kind of support, especially that Israel can really control the borders so well as it has been doing now. Where will they get all the? At some point, weapons go bad, ammunition runs out, food runs out, water runs out. Where are they going to get all the stuff that they need? It's not Iraq. Iraq has 100 ways to come in. So there are similarities, but we also have to remember the dissimilarities, and they're very significant here. This is why I do not think we'll see an Iraq-style insurgency. What we can see, though, even if Hamas technically is broken, which means basically to me, it's not killing 40,000 fighters. To me, it means breaking the command structure, breaking the leadership. It's a few hundred people. Once these are disbanded, we're done, because they've just become headless soldiers. Let's not forget, Hamas is not the only organization there. This is something that people don't talk enough about, and it's not only the Palestinian the PIJ, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. There are other organizations as well. They exist there. Once you create that vacuum, okay, then what?
Then you have tens of thousands of soldiers ready to fill
want to join someone. Now, this is why we talk about the Palestinian authorities. If you're going to join, why don't they join back into the Palestinian policy? But then you run against Israel's policy of separating the West Bank. So somebody has to think about the answer here, and we can talk about that, the options for the day after.
Well, we're actually going to take a little bit of a look at the West Bank briefly because one of our reporters has taken a look at yet another security challenge facing issue. In Israel, the prime minister and the military want one thing and the security cabinet deciding another. That's exactly what happened just last night when the security cabinet rejected a push to let Palestinian workers from the West Bank return to work inside Israel. Senior correspondent Owen Alterman explains just what happened here.
Once upon a time, in an October 6th world, this was the Erez Crossing, the border between Israel and the Gaza Strip, with Palestinian traders and workers lining up to cross into Israel to do business or earn a living. But this is an October 7th world, and in that world, the Israeli Security Cabinet Sunday night rejected a move to return even West Bank Palestinian workers to building sites and farms inside Israel. Returning Gazan workers is a non-starter.
The entry of workers from Judea and Samaria is exactly the continuation of the same concept that we warn against. We know what it is when they come full of hate and motivated. I'm not saying that all of them are, but it's enough that 10% of them are like that.
For decades, West Bank Palestinians have been a key part of the Israeli workforce, filling jobs that Israelis don't want to do, an imported workforce, as in many developed countries. The establishment saw this as a win-win. The Israeli economy got workers it needs. West Bank Palestinians earned money to support their families. Then came October 7th, and reports that workers from inside the Gaza Strip helped the perpetrators navigate the kibbutzim on which those workers had worked, and slaughter Israelis, whom those workers had known. Some experts still urge caution.
During the second intifada, I was in charge of the Ramallah area, and I said that we need to let those people that are not involved with the terrorism to come and work in Israel. Eventually, the government decided not to let them work, and I think that many people were pushed into terrorism.
The Security Cabinet rejected the advice of the National Security Council and of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu himself, making this a striking vote of no confidence. The politicians and likely the public do not trust those security services to keep out the bad guys, just like they didn't on October 7th.
Fadi, we're going to return to you for the next couple of minutes because we saw in that report this discussion about Israel security, and this is a discussion that's really fundamentally about the West Bank and the Palestinian Authority because the Israeli government says it doesn't matter if the Palestinian Authority is not technically Hamas or anything. The people that live in the West Bank are still a major security threat to Israel as well.
Yeah, and that's part of the impossible conundrum. Believe me, I don't envy the decision makers right now. I've heard or seen a conversation with a few hours ago with a leading real estate developer in the north, one of the biggest in the country, and the whole construction business came into a screeching halt. Nothing is being built. And it's not only homes. People forget. Everything needs to be built. Businesses need to be built. Farms needs to be built. Roads needs to be built. So everything stopped completely. That's it. Nobody's doing anything anywhere in the country. And that means that many of these construction companies will start filing for bankruptcy soon. Especially that we have such a high level of interest rate right now. So there's only so much you can keep on going without having the contracts stop paying. Now the employees almost all of them are from the West Bank, some from Gaza. What do you do? There was talk about importing employees from India and places like that. Well, why would any sane Indian want to come to a country in war? Or from any country, really. Why would they want to do this? Especially that we've seen what those marauders from Hamas did to those poor Thai employees. I mean, we've seen how they treated them. Those pictures were seen all over the world. So people are not stupid. They're not just going to come to a place like this where this can happen to them. So what do you do? Now, we are the place, we can talk more about this later, but there's so much to say about this. The economic effects of this war are just keep on getting more complicated, and we'll see more of it.
It's an entire country and an entire society that's been overturned. Fadi, we're going to discuss this and so much more after a short break. For everyone else, we are going to go on a 3-minute break. When we get back, we have this topic as well as so many others to discuss, so stay with us. We'll be right back.
Israel is in a state of war.
Families completely gunned down in their beds.
We have no idea where is she. As our soldiers are fighting on the front lines, but the general perception is something that certainly needs to be fought as well.
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra Espadas de Hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24, únicamente en i24 News.
Thank you very much for staying with us. Israel's focus right now remains on Hamas and the war in Gaza, but Israel's leaders are quite cognizant of the threat that remains to the north of the country from Hezbollah and the possibility that once the fighting in Gaza ends, the war can continue in another form. With more on this, here's our correspondent, Robert Swift.
Throughout Israel's war in Gaza, its military has kept one eye firmly fixed to the north. With the status quo shattered, Israel has indicated that it will not return to the security situation that existed prior to October the 7th. It fears that Hezbollah, more powerful than Hamas, could repeat the tactics used on that day. UN Resolution 1701 states that Hezbollah should contain its forces north of the Litani River, a declaration that's been ignored for years, but is now a priority for Israel in light of the daily skirmishing on the Lebanese border. Israeli leaders have not ruled out using military force inside Lebanon to secure the north and the communities there.
The situation in the north needs to be changed. It will change. When the day comes, we will have to act. It could happen after the Gaza operation. You never know how long the Gaza operation will take. But we will need to bring the people back so that they will not be displaced in their country. They must be assured that the situation in the north is different.
And reports in the Hezbollah-affiliated Lebanese paper, Al-Akbar, said that UNIFIL peacekeepers passed the message to Lebanese parties that Israel considers everything that moves on the border with Lebanon at a depth of up to 3 kilometers, whether civilian or military, a legitimate target for its forces, to which a Hezbollah official said that they would respond in kind. Israel is under increasing diplomatic pressure to curtail its military operations in the new year, but the possibility exists that it will in fact expand them.
And we are still in studio with Dr. Fadi Ismail, former senior staffer to the U.S. Congress, as well as research fellow for the International Institute for Counterterrorism, and our correspondent, Robert Swift. Robert, I want to open with you because that was your report. You want to discuss a little further what we just saw. Everyone is talking about the war with Hamas, but Hezbollah is always acknowledged as a far bigger threat. But it's a threat that Israel is realizing might be an inevitable war to deal with. Walk us through what the options really are here.
So Israel's a little bit in a catch-22. After seeing what happened on October 7th, it doesn't feel that it can have a force like Hezbollah on its northern border and just sleep with that soundly. But at the same time, it doesn't have great options going forward. It does have options, but not all of them are that great in terms of going forward. It can essentially escalate the fighting which has taken place there. Since about the second day of the war, there's basically been daily skirmishes taking place on the border, but there's not been maneuvering. There's not been troops moving vis-a-vis each other. It's just been taking shots at each other. If Israel were to escalate things, sending ground forces, that is an option that it has. It would likely be, let's say it clearly outguns Hezbollah. However, there's a few caveats to that. Number one, it would be fighting Hezbollah on that group's territory, which is to their advantage. And number two is Hezbollah are notorious for the size of their rocket arsenal, rockets and missiles. So the level of artillery that they could fire towards Israeli cities would make what Hamas have been doing look it would be much more significant than this. And then you finally got the diplomatic angle. The US, from the very early days of this war, has been telling Israel that it doesn't want Israel to escalate things in the north. It wants to keep this conflict from spilling into a regional conflict. Can Israel persuade the United States that it needs to and it should conduct this expanded operation? Or can it afford to play this alone? If the United States were to isolate Israel, if it were to cross that threshold, would Israel still do it?
It's a huge challenge for Israel because Israel is relying very heavily on the United States for supplying arms as well as diplomatic support at the UN. I want to turn to you, Fadi, on this one, because in Israel's previous engagements with Hezbollah on the ground, Lebanon 1, Lebanon 2, the ratio of Israeli deaths in combat to Hezbollah deaths in combat is nowhere near as good for Israel as we're seeing in the conflict in Gaza. The losses in any protracted fight against Hezbollah will be incredible if things continue as we saw in the past. Does Israel have any good plan for dealing with Hezbollah?
If I am Prime Minister, I would bide my time, find a way to calm the war that we have now, and start doing the following. First of all, we have to understand the situation that we're in right now did not arise in one day. There were many, many mistakes, many wrong assumptions that we operated under, and it took years for us to be here. Once you understand that, also the style of solution becomes much clearer. We will not solve the problems now. This is something we have to accept because we have, in a way, maneuvered ourselves into here. I'm trying not to point fingers because it's not one person or something like that. It's an establishment. What would I do? First of all, remember, the head of the snake is in Tehran. I need to make it really not worth their while to use this tool against us. There are many things that can be done there. And if you go even higher to what this whole war is about, it's not really a war between Israel and Hamas. Yeah, it is. But there's also a dimension that is a global geostrategic dimension. What Hamas did there, they did not attack Israel. They attacked a very important process of rapprochement between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which would have completed an international plan to create an axis, anywhere from India all the way to Northern America. That was the plan. It was on its way to happen. There's a counter axis to that doesn't like that plan. So if you start thinking in those terms, we start thinking about what we do with the other axis in a way that will influence Iran to not activate Hezbollah. That's on the geostrategic level. There's so much to be said about this, so many things we can do, beginning with ending the war in Ukraine and getting Russia out of this dependency on Iranian hardware. Things will change immediately. All of a sudden, their behavior in Syria changes, and then the Iranians' access to Lebanon and so on. Many things change. Now, that's on that level. On a different level, rebuild the army. For 3 decades, we have been cutting down the IDF. Today's IDF is not what it used to be in my time. It's definitely not what it used to be 20 years before I served. It needs to be rebuilt. Not only technology, not only big, fancy stuff, tanks, infantry, special forces. This will take a few years, but we have to do it. We have to go back to those formations. It costs, fine. That means you need to rebuild the Israeli economy, stop with things and legislation that weaken the economy and strengthen it again, lower taxes, all these things, build the economy so you can carry this new army, because from here to the next 5, 6, 7 years, the IDF has to change its face in size as well as in capabilities. Anti-missile defense. We have some new stuff coming up, all kinds of laser weaponry and stuff like that can be very useful once they come. It's almost complete. We have done the first field experiment in this war, proved itself. Okay, once we build this whole array, then the war with Hezbollah will look completely different. So the question, the play here, the game here is on time. The Iranians know that. They know that if we do this in a few years, we'll kill this whole stash that they built can become almost meaningless. But we need the time. This can has been kicked down the road. Sorry for the cliche, but that's what we did. One government after the other being busy with nonsense, rather than like, hey, we changed 4 or 5 governments in 3 years. That's stupid. We can't do these things anymore. We need stable governments, I don't care who, and start rebuilding this process. So I gave different directions, but there is a lot to be done if we are to be serious, because the mistakes that led us to this corner that we are in right now have been building up over decades. Now we understand that. Now we need somebody with some guts to give those orders and start moving.
But there's another challenge in this as well, and that's because is time in our favor or in the enemy's favor? Just look at one of the other arenas that Israel is dealing with right now, and that is, of course, the Houthis in Yemen. We're seeing these attacks on international shipping, now threatening to attack any ship heading towards Israel and completely cut off the straits there and access to the entire Red Sea. This is a threat that is extremely existential for everyone in the region and the world.
Absolutely.
And it's a threat right now.
You asked 2 fantastic questions. I'll start with the second one. The story with the Houthis is not Israel's problem. Right now, the biggest loser, economically speaking, is Egypt, by the way, because of the reduction in the passages of ships. They pass through the Suez Canal. That means there's less hard currency going into Egyptian coffers than what it was before. So there are many, and the same goes for other countries. So we have to frame it as the world's problem. It is not Israel's problem, because the world can't put up with this, especially after Corona and the war in Ukraine. The world can't do this. We live in a just-in-time economy that has been already stricken several times. The world needs to deal with this. There are other navies. It doesn't have to be the Israeli navy, which is pretty small. There's Egypt has a huge navy. Turkey does. The U.S. Everybody should deal with this. China has sent a couple of flotillas already. They need to take care of this, not us. The problem is for the world. And I promise you, if the world frames it as its own problem, this issue will be fixed very quickly. Now, to your first question, is time working on your behalf? Well, that's the smart of the general. Time is a resource as like anything else. You use it correctly, it will be in your favor. Use it incorrectly, it will be against you. It's a question of how well you lead, you plan, you lead, and you adapt as time passes by. So that's I know it's not an answer, but it is an answer, because it depends on the policies you take. Some policies will mean that you will lose, And some policies mean what you will gain. It's we need the whole hour to talk about this, but I think I've given enough to show that there's so much to be done, and in a rational, intelligent way that can really turn things around, but it takes time.
Well, speaking of taking time, we're going to change arenas now to the United States, and that's a look at the next generation and what they actually believe. That's because in the United States, a political firestorm is continuing to burn after the heads of America's most prestigious universities refuse to take clear and concise action against calls for the genocide of Jews on their campuses. University of Pennsylvania former president Liz McGill has already stepped down, and now Harvard's Claudine Gay is in the sights of the board of directors after a meeting on Sunday. Republican Representative Elise Stefanik said, 1 down, 2 to go, and along with a group of 71 bipartisan lawmakers, sent a letter to the governing boards of Harvard, Penn, and MIT, urging them to remove their university leaders. Some major donors are also aiming to remove Gay as well. And And as you just saw there, in recent weeks, massive pro-Hamas demonstrations have ignited across American universities. In many of them, clear calls for genocide, with protesters chanting, "Gaz the Jews." That was at Penn State. And there is only one solution, also at Penn State, a reference to Hitler's final solution. And these same universities that have spearheaded heavy-handed anti-racism policies that expel students for far lesser infractions have remained silent against this blatant hatred of Jews. Well, now joining us is Gerard Filitti, Senior Counsel of the Lawfare Project. Gerard, thank you very much for being with us. You are a lawyer with a Lawfare Project, so you have a good idea of what weapons are available to fight back against this sort of, well, insanity that's spreading like wildfire on these campuses. Walk us through what those options are.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. There are a variety of options, starting with political pressure, which we saw last week in the hearings. The hearings are basically a very good tool to expose the full nature of the problem, but also to highlight that these administrations, these colleges, and many more have failed to do anything about anti-Semitism. The next powerful tool is the legal system itself, filing lawsuits, filing complaints, helping Jewish students enforce their civil rights protections. Because ultimately what we're seeing is a violation of the civil rights of Jewish students and faculty on college campuses. They're not being respected. They're not being taken seriously. These administrators are so quick to jump to help other minority groups, but do nothing for Jewish students. Finally, we have grassroots activism, such as with the End Jew Hatred civil rights movement, people actually getting together to send letters, email, get together in protests, have solidarity rallies to support students, and again, to force pressure, to force change on the part of these schools.
Now, Gerard, I'll have to ask, which side is going to win this battle? Because on one hand, you saw these campus administrators say, this is a free speech issue, they can't get involved. But we've seen the American administrations in the past, under the Obama administration, invoking civil rights laws to go after universities' funding if they believed that discrimination on campus was creating a chilling effect on the civil rights of the students. Which side's stronger here?
Well, the side that's stronger is the side of the right. And the side of the right is, well, the right thing to do is to impose consequences on Jew hatred. We're not talking about speech. We're talking about conduct. We're not talking about just students who are saying hurtful things. We're talking about students who interfere with the ability of Jewish students to go to class, to study, to participate in university activities. That's where the violation of civil rights comes in. That's the action that is more than just words. And that's what's punishable. That's where you impose consequences. When you harass, intimidate, threaten Jewish students, that's not just words. It's not an academic dispute. This is action that requires consequences.
If that's the case, would that not fall under the purview of the criminal police investigation rather than a campus disciplinary procedure?
Criminal procedures relate to violations of criminal law, and that's more limited in scope to when you have a physical assault, where you have desecration of property, when you have vandalism. These are things that can and should be prosecuted in the criminal system. For the administration, it's an issue of intimidation and harassment, which could also in some circumstances be prosecuted, but ultimately the first objective is to keep Jewish students safe. So we want people who engage in this conduct off our campuses. After that, it's a matter of whether it rises to the level of a crime that should be prosecuted or whether it's an administrative matter. But the first step is getting these Jew haters who bring intimidation and harassment and threats with them to leave the college campuses.
Gerard, when we're talking about the tactics you mentioned, the tools you mentioned, these are very good tools for going after establishments, for going after institutions and high-ranking figure. But if we look at a lot of the polling of the students themselves, this hatred is coming at a grassroots level. It's coming from the bottom up. And even if you go after the top-level people, how are you going to deal with the fact that these angry mobs seem to be forming spontaneously?
Well, I would disagree with you a little and say that while it seems that they're forming spontaneously, this is all directed from the top. This is in part a result of foreign influence that's come into academia. It's in part a result of professors who have espoused anti-Jewish and anti-Israeli views for decades. It's not just grassroots bottom up. It's students who are influenced by this. It's students who are brainwashed into believing these hateful things that turn into action. So we need to cut the head off the snake effectively. It's to deal with the problem at the academia level. Who are the professors who are influencing these students? Where are they getting funding for their departments? Why are the schools not doing anything about it? Grassroots, you can re-educate. You can educate students on right and wrong. You can educate students on anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. But ultimately, it's the grown-ups, the ones who are responsible for inculcating this attitude of violence. They need to be held accountable too.
Gerard, one of the things that we've seen over the past decade or so is how radicals got into these positions. They used something called power mapping. They found an institution who has power over that institution to remove threats to their power and put their own people in place. Is there a way for the right side here to create a similar form of power mapping and figure out where the most effective dominoes to knock out are?
There is, and I think that's what a lot of groups are doing. We're doing that at the Lawfare Project. I know Congress is working on this as well. It's identifying in part where the money is coming from for all these activities. Who is funding Within Our Lifetime Palestine? Who is funding SJP? Where are the funding for these university chairs coming from? Is it foreign funding? Is it terrorist funding? We need to find the answers to those questions, and that's how we do the mapping.
Well, thank you very much, Gerard, for breaking down how this fight is going to have to be fought. It's a very complicated one ahead because you're not simply going after people. You're going after ideology and all of its foot soldiers. Taking out an idea, not going to be as easy as going after the administrators that spread it. With that said, though, we are going to look at more local events now. With the return of hostages from Hamas's captivity, some families of the hostages who are still there have received a first sign of life from their loved ones. The information that provided a drop of certainty in a sea of doubt and fear also emphasized how critical their situation is and how acute the struggle to bring them back home is. More in this report.
It's been 65 days since Yoni's daughter, Naama, was kidnapped to Gaza. The chilling video of her abduction has become a symbol of cruelty and harm to young women and the danger they are in. When the children began to return from captivity, some of the girls returned with braids in their hair, braids that Naama's parents know closely.
Maybe it's stories we tell ourselves. Naama did a lot of triathlons in her youth, and this is exactly the way they used to do these braids.
Imagining her sitting and doing braids for a little girl she took care of is something that could actually sound normal.
Yes, it certainly warms the heart, but for a relatively limited time.
Since then, a real sign of life has arrived. Abductees who saw Naama and were with her before they were released called Yoni and said they had met her. She is injured, but alive.
The first feeling is there is air. You can breathe again. But it lasted a few hours until the evidence came. Naama is 19 years old. She's a girl. She has quite a few girls with her, young girls. We all understand their vulnerability, the potential harm that can be done to them, and the feeling that those who are running the war, there's no one to trust. They're the only ones we can put our trust in. But as long as they don't give the most basic sense of security, it actually causes this cry to be doubled and doubled.
I received a call from someone who was with him. He asked them to call me and gave my phone number. He literally said, "This is the number. Please call her and tell her that I'm alive and that they should do everything possible to get me out."
The last time she heard from him was when he and their mother hid in the safe room in a bed under the blankets, and their father left and never returned. After a few days, she found out her parents were murdered and Itai was kidnapped. In the message he conveyed to her through the abductees, she understood for the first time what was happening that morning. From what Itai told the hostages that were with him, on October 7th, they were in the safe room. They covered themselves with blankets, and then the terrorists started shooting at them. My mother must have shouted that she was injured and probably died. I hope at least she died quickly and didn't suffer. But Itai already knew she was dead. It seemed that he was injured by something, and he probably stood up, according to what I understood. And then they took him away. And so that's why I say he was in fear of death from the moment they actually shot him, and he didn't die. Miraculously, he didn't die. And since then, he has been in constant fear of death until this moment. When you receive such a sign of life, does it give hope or does it do the opposite?
There's this kind of sigh of relief for a moment that he's alive. But then I also understand that he's in the worst mental and emotional state, the worst I could never actually imagine. And even more than that, because until then, I couldn't imagine it at all. I didn't allow myself to imagine he was, where he was. And now suddenly it became tangible. I was told that he was very, very fearful and that he's very scared. I heard that from the words he said to them, from the conversations that were held there, that this is not the Itai I know.
You must understand that even if the swaps return according to the list at the moment, Itai will not be the first to come back.
First of all, I'm not ready to accept it. It's very easy to make categories, but no, there are people there waiting to be taken out, and every minute that passes, they are in danger.
You think the dog feels it too?
Yes, she misses him as well.
Since that Friday when the swap stopped and the fighting resumed, the atmosphere has changed. The same breathing space that returned for a moment gave way to great concern to Naama and Itai and to other hostages, and the understanding that there is no time.
I am the father whose daughter has been in hell for 61 days. And my feeling as a father of such a girl is that I can't help her. I can't save her.
And before we go to break, we are going to follow up on one of our earlier stories in the broadcast, that, of course, being the story of the Harvard anti-Semitism crisis. It seems that the Harvard faculty is now backing the president of the university, Claudine Gay. A petition has been signed by more than 600 faculty members, saying that the school must resist political pressures that are, quote, at odds with Harvard's commitments to academic freedom. It's worth noting you did not see this sort of outcry of support against censorship or similar issues in response to any other forms of discrimination at universities across America. Now, this is all coming as they're facing intense pressure, and many backers, including billionaire CEOs, are demanding answers and in many cases threatening to remove donations from Harvard's endowment. That said, this is an ongoing story that will be updated as it develops over the near future to see if they manage to resist those pressures measures or if they are going to apply their own university code of conduct equally across all groups, rather than simply politically convenient ones. That said, we are about to go on a break, so stay with us. We're going to be back in 3 minutes with so much more coverage of Israel at war and all the associated issues. We're going to be right back.
Israel is at war. Make an investment in Israel bonds. It is the most powerful and direct way to stand with Israel. Visit israelbonds.com and invest now.
Made for Me, a unique concept in Israel. Custom-made men's fashion to your measurements. Made for Me, designer of all your events. Schedule your appointment at www.madeforme.co.il. Made for Me, official dresser of I-24 News.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Israel is in a state of war.
Families completely gunned down in their beds.
We have no idea where is she. As our soldiers are fighting on the front lines, but the general perception is something that certainly needs to be fought as well.
את כולם הכרנו, את כולם נזכור תמיד.
חיבוק אחד ליום מביא את השלום, זאת הנכדה המתוקה שלי.
ברוך אתה אדוני.
Thanks for staying with us. The war in the south is grinding on, intensive fighting across Khan Yunis, and so far 104 soldiers have fallen in battle against the enemy in Gaza since operations began. Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said Hamas's last major terror forces in the north of Gaza are now on the cusp of total destruction. But that war is far from over, and the fate of Israel's hostages still hangs in the balance. To break this down more, we are still in studio with Dr. Fadi Ismail, former senior staffer to U.S. Congress, as well as a research fellow with the International Institute for Counterterrorism. Fadi, I want to discuss the hostage situation. There are still 137 hostages held by Hamas. The military seems hopeful that as operations continue, they can force Hamas to negotiate, trading hostages for more time to preserve their own lives. Is this another realistic one, given that we've already seen Hamas make unrealistic demands and Israel's already said there will not be any more negotiations until after the war?
To answer your question directly, yes, of course it's realistic, because if there's a meeting of interest at some point, which can happen, it will happen. The question is, will there be such a meeting of interest, such a intersection of interest? Could happen. I can see that maybe in some complex, some area, it was the IDF will see that pushing forward will cost way too many lives. On the other hand, Hamas will be really in a bad situation there. So it might work for both sides, like to do such an exchange to lift some of the pressures from both sides. Something tactical can happen in passing that will make it worthwhile for both sides. So the short answer to your question, yeah, of course it can happen. And it could happen tonight, tomorrow. I mean, why not, really? In principle, Hamas is under huge pressure. And it's conceivable that they will be willing to do that. And it could also be a case that the IDF decides, hey, we don't really have to risk so many soldiers in a certain neighborhood, certain building. If we can do something there, why not? Yeah, I see it. You know, the fact that all this grandstanding, I never buy into it, of any, that's for the media, for internal, for public consumption. Once the door is closed and there are no cameras in the room, people change the tone, so that's the way it is.
Well, we're going to look at another party that has some interest in the hostage situation. Thank you very much, Fadi, for helping us understand so many issues at play here. But this other party is, of course, Russia. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Bogdanov demanding the release of hostages held in Gaza in telephone calls on Sunday and Monday with Hamas and other Palestinian factions. This is all coming from Russia's foreign ministry. The statement did not make clear whether Russia sought the release of all hostages or just Russian nationals from among them. But Russia has maintained a very clear anti-Israel stance on the war, calling it collective punishment and indiscriminate shelling. Analysts say the Gaza war has only helped Russia, taking world attention away from the war in Ukraine. We are now joined by John Hardy, the director of the Russia program at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. John, it's good to have you with us. Let's talk about what Russia's interest in this conflict has been and what they're gaining from it.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on. I think overall it's important to remember that Russia is a fairly marginal player in this conflict. Its ability to influence events on the ground and the thinking of the various players involved is fairly limited. But it has gained a lot from the conflict. As you mentioned, it's distracted global attention from Russia's own war in Ukraine. It allows Moscow to present itself as kind of a more responsible party and curry favor with some capitals that support the Palestinians against Israel. I think another important element is Russia's burgeoning relationship with Iran. I wouldn't go so far as to say Moscow and Tehran are really allies, but certainly they're both investing in that partnership, and that could be one reason why Russia's response to the current Gaza war has been really more pro-Palestinian in contrast to its traditional attempts to kind of keep good relations with Israel.
John, do you see a good or simple way to break the connection between Russia and Iran, given how much damage Iran has done to the region here?
No, unfortunately, I don't. I think in Moscow, the war in Ukraine is really all-consuming. So, and that affects how Moscow looks at its relationships with different countries, including in the Middle East. So, the priority is getting drones, it's getting artillery ammunition, other material from Iran. If Iran can provide that, I think Tehran gains some kind of bargaining power vis-a-vis Moscow. I think the one check really could be Moscow does want to maintain good relations with the Gulf Arab countries and even with Israel, despite its kind of bellicose rhetoric. So I don't think the Russians want to go all in with Iran, so to speak. So to an extent, the Gulf countries, Israel, others, might be able to kind of lobby Moscow not to, say, sell Su-35 fighter jets to Iran.
You mentioned that Russia's a minor player in this specific conflict. That said, Russia has always historically been a major influence in the Middle East, particularly with Israel's enemies. Are they only marginalized as long as the war in Ukraine is taking all of their attention and their resources and, most importantly, their weapon systems from the region? Or are they going to be back in force?
Sure. So obviously, Russia does have there's some military presence in the region, most notably in Syria, and its bases there. But it's really kind of an economy of force operation. I don't think they have the appetite or capability for anything like a U.S.-style military presence in the region. But there are a lot of ways they can influence events, or at least create the appearance of influence through kind of on the cheap. This reported deal to send a Pantsir air defense system to Hezbollah through the Wagner Group is one example. I don't think that Pantsir will make a huge difference for Hezbollah or for Israeli air operations, but it's a way Moscow can kind of get itself in the headlines and kind of remind regional players that, hey, we're here too.
Let's talk about what relation Russia and Hamas seem to have.
Right, so obviously they've had ties going back to the 2000s. I think originally, funnily enough, the Russians saw potential, relations with Hamas as a way to sort of be of use to the West. Obviously, as Russia's own relationship with the West has deteriorated, I think the Russians still see that relationship with Hamas as leverage, but maybe in a more nefarious way, leverage against the West, right? So overall, obviously the Russians hosted a Hamas delegation since the war began. I still see these ties as relatively modest. At least to my knowledge, the Russians have not been providing military weapons directly to Hamas. If that were to change, obviously, I think we'd be in a kind of a different ball game in terms of their relations and Russia's impact on the conflict.
John, with everything we're seeing in the region, is there a strain of thought in Russia's leadership that perhaps Hamas is not so much an asset against the West as it is too volatile to be an asset to anybody? It could be a liability to Russia as well.
That's a great question. I think in Syria, the Russians probably saw that on the one hand, these groups, Iran-backed groups, can be difficult to control, and I think the Russians know that ultimately these groups are not going to answer to Russia. They're not going to be a Russian proxy. So you have to be careful when you're investing, in these groups. That being said, I think Russia in general, as I touched on before, likes a strategy where there's minimal investment and high rewards. So I mentioned the Pantsir to Hezbollah. That's a great example where you're not doing much. You can get a good bit of reward in terms of political rewards, in terms of just making your presence felt, in terms of media attention. But that doesn't necessarily augur a sort of strong Hezbollah-Russia axis.
Well, thank you very much for helping us understand just what role they had in the region. Thank you very much, John, for joining us.
Thank you.
We're going to look back at some tales of heroism as well as tales of loss from October 7th. 58 police officers died protecting partygoers at the Nova Music Festival on October 7th. It makes it the biggest tragedy in the history of the Israeli police. Sagi was one of the police officers that responded to that attack and fought down 14 terrorists, surviving. Our Moore Ellen has more in this next story.
It's Sagi's first time back in the fighting zone of the Nova Festival since October 7. Barbara, his girlfriend, is with him. He brought her for moral support, but returning still made him uneasy.
It's hard, bringing a lot of memories, a lot of people that you saw at that day that are not with us today. A lot of memories. I arrived here at 6 o'clock in the morning for morning shift here in the party. A lot of young people, happy, dancing, good vibes. The stage was here in the middle. All the people, you can see the picture of the fortunately murdered was here. In the middle was the dancing area. The war room and the firefighter room and all this thing was in the back of the stage. And when I arrived, we just preparing ourselves to the shift, to secure the area, to make sure everything is okay, everybody's okay. And in about 6:30, kinda, we saw a lot of rockets are coming from Gaza into Israel. Immediately, the police commander that was in the party told us, all the officers, to go inside the party and stop the music and evacuate everybody out.
At first, the police present asked the party-goers to lie on the ground. Minutes later, they decided to evacuate them completely. As people were leaving the area, the situation was revealed to be graver than imaginable.
Someone from the party ran at me with his phone in his hand, and he said to me, my brother is on the line, okay, and someone shoot at him on the road, on the main road. Immediately I took his phone and I ran into the police war room, and I tell the police officer that was there, take the phone, speak with him.
Sagi, together with two other policemen, drove to the location of the shooting. One of them was Eliona Ostafenko. On the main road, only 220 yards from the party area, they encountered first signs of the tragedy that would unfold that day.
We get here, and over there, near the sign, we saw a man just do like this with his hand, and we drove to him, and he says someone shoot at him, and we look at his car, and we see in the back door a bullet, just a hole of a bullet. He wasn't injured.
The civilian told Sagi he saw trucks with people holding weapons.
In this moment, I pulled my gun and I take him and went like off the back of the road over there, and we lay on the ground.
Meanwhile, Eliona and another policeman went back to the party area to report and call for reinforcements.
We start to understood what's happening, but we thought it's only a few ones that came here and they are still here around somewhere.
The three were now driving again, trying to catch up with the terrorists. Finally, they saw a car on the side of the road.
In this place, we saw a white van, and we saw a man lying on the floor near the van, and he just put his hand on his belly and he screamed. So me and Ilona get off the police car, and went to him and started to talk to him. And when I pulled up his shirt, I saw a big hole in his belly because of a bullet. And I said to Elona, start make a pressure. And I get into the van from the other side. I open the door and I see a guy laying on his back with his eyes open. And I check if he had the pulse or something like that. And he didn't have anything. He was murdered.
While Sagi and Elona tended to the wounded, the third policeman drove back to fetch the medical teams.
So we are here, only me and Elona, with no communication, no car, no anything. We stay with the injured people. And then we saw 2 jeeps that come at us, and they park like 100, 150 meters from us. And from each jeep, get off something like 6 or 7 terrorists each, so it's like 12 or 14 terrorists, and they're just starting to shoot at us.
The two were standing in an open field. While outnumbered, the terrorists were also better armed with rifles and RPGs. Eliona and Sagi had their personal weapons and 2 magazines with 15 bullets each. Sagi dragged the wounded civilian to the other side of the van. An exchange of fire began as they tried to shoot back, but they realized they didn't stand a chance.
I tell Ilona we have to run back, but there is nowhere to run back here. And then I see this water pipe.
Under fire, they both ran as fast as they could.
They shoot at us. The bullets are like everywhere.
And then, the second before they reached the water pipe, Eliona was hit.
Exactly in this point, like 1 or 2 meters from the pipe, Ilona said to me, "I'm hit," and she hold her breath, and she is feeling over here. And I get here behind this pipe, and I lie right here, and my head is behind this pipe, and I'm right here, and with my pistol, I shoot at them, and they shoot at me like tons of bullets.
The terrorists went back to the van to make sure the 2 wounded civilians were dead.
You are complete yourself with the thought that you're gonna die. That's the only thing you think of. The only thing you think of. That's it.
1 against 14 terrorists. What chance did Sagi have?
One of them go to their jeep, and he bring an RPG, and he go over his knees, and he shoot the RPG on me, and the RPG is exploding like 10, 15 meters behind me.
The 14 terrorists came into Sagi's direction. He played dead and didn't shoot back.
And then I see 2 army chopper just getting from this way to this way above this field. And the terrorists see the chopper. And they take 3 RPG and they shoot on the chopper.
Luckily, they missed, but now the terrorists, for some inexplicable reason, go back on their jeeps and flee.
In this moment, I check Ilona that laying here, and unfortunately, she murdered.
Eliona Ostafenko was killed at the age of 25. In total, 58 police officers died protecting the partygoers of the Nova Festival on October 7, making it the biggest tragedy in the history of Israeli police.
I see car going just to the terrorist direction, and I ran to the road, and just stop.
Sagi could still spot the terrorists on the side of the road, waiting for more cars to cross. He updated the soldier inside the car. The 2 did a U-turn in the intersection nearby. They saw a group of 100 Nova Festival survivors. He took charge and put them all in a safe room. The soldier, a civilian with a gun, and Sagi guarded the entrance of the safe room for hours until the IDF was able to extract them to a safe location. Over 2 months have passed. And these beautiful fields that on October 7 became the landscape of an unimaginable horror movie are now again peaceful, thanks to the men and women who put their lives on the line to save others.
As the war goes on, it's become more important than ever to keep the spirits of soldiers up. 350,000 reservists called up to action for 2 months now, and on one of the happy holidays on the Jewish calendar, that of Hanukkah. Well, how do you celebrate when you are deployed in a war zone fighting for your nation's very survival? Well, joining me right now is Rabbi Eli Nadich, and as well as that's the rabbi of the Chabad on the Coast, as well as Rebbetzin Sarah Nadich, co-director of Chabad on the Coast, talking about how you are bringing some cheer to the military on these days. Rabbi, I want to start with you. Talk us about what your agency is doing and how the soldiers have received it.
So I'm actually coming from just about 2 hours ago. I got back home from visiting a base of primarily a Duvdavan, elite unit, and we brought lots of donuts, of course, live music, and we lit menorah together with them. And it was just going around from soldiers to soldier, just giving them love and warmth and encouragement, and definitely boosting the morale in this very, very difficult time for many people, and just seeing this incredible light on these bases.
Representative, I want to ask you a question, because you're telling me that as he's doing this, there's also another challenge. We talk about all those reservists called up, but they've left a lot of people at home, left a lot of people behind, and we're not just talking about the soldiers, but also their women, and you're helping them as well.
Correct. So we have something called Chabad Cares, where we send care packages before Shabbat, during the week, to partners and wives of IDF soldiers. And it really, like, these women and these partners are the warriors of light holding down the home front, and they need support. So we're there for them, a community lifting them up and supporting them. Yeah.
How has this been received by the soldiers? I mean, everyone's always happy to get a box of donuts, but when you are in the middle of what has been the nightmare on Israel's border for decades now, what's going through their minds?
So I got to say, for about 5 weeks, I was up north, and the happiest moments, I would say, hands down, were those moments when people came to visit fellow soldiers on base, and when people from our community came to visit, and the feeling and the emotion and the happiness that you see on the face of the soldiers, that they're not forgotten, that someone is thinking about them, cares about them, making a trip out just to see them and brighten up their holiday. It's really, really incredible experience for everyone involved, but for the soldiers, it brings so much happiness to their lives.
I can imagine. Sarah, I want to talk about the needs that a lot of these people have and what they're really missing in their lives during the 2 months of war, all these families, deployments. There's gaps left behind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they need a lot of support, emotional support, support such as babysitting their children, picking them up from Gan, hot, fresh dinner when, one of my friends, she's a doctor, and she works full-time at Ichalev, and she comes home, and she has 2 children. Her husband's up on the Lebanese border, and Chabad is there making sure she doesn't have to cook dinner. We've got you, and you're supported, and we see you. So I think there's a lot of needs like that, and we see them, and we're there for them, and we're spreading light and acts of goodness, of kindness to our community, to all of the partners, and to the IDF, and each of us is that light, and we can spread that, and that's the message of Hanukkah, essentially. Even when it's dark out, spread the light of goodness and kindness to those around you, and the world will heal slowly.
Ellie, I'm going to toss the next question to you. Maybe it's more a spiritual question, but I know a lot of people that since this war has broken out have become a lot more religious than they were in the past. Many people that were entirely secular have embraced religion as a sign of national identity, as a peoplehood. Among soldiers, many of which are also drawn from the secular world, have you seen something similar, that they believe that they are fighting for a Jewish identity as well as a nation?
Absolutely. It's a wonderful question that you're asking. almost every single base that I've been on, you see tzitzit strings, people asking for tefillin. We've been giving out these tactical tefillin kits to soldiers all throughout the country, and just definitely it's something that we're not just fighting here. This is not a physical battle. This is very much a spiritual battle. And with that comes the spiritual identity of every single Jew here. And every single soldier is reaching for something spiritual as well. And that deep meaning that comes with our Jewish identity. And the fight is not about fighting darkness with darkness. We are soldiers of light. And our primary goal is to spread light and to truly bring this light to the world. Yeah.
I'm glad that both of you are doing what you can to raise spirits and fight for the spirits of the people of Israel. Thank you very much, Sarah. Ali, thank you as well.